So Robert Menendez was facing re-election in New Jersey as a United States Senator, and he's actually very important because he was going to assume the chairmanship of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Now, the people not happy about this apparently was the Cuban government. Robert Menendez is a Cuban American and has been very harsh against the Castro regime and the entire Cuban government overall, and he's wanted to retain the sanctions. Now, on a policy level, I do not agree with him. I think the sanctions have been a 50-year failure. I mean, how long are you going to go with a policy that has not worked? And so how many U.S. presidents does the Castro family have to outlast before you say, hey, you know what? No mas. Now, that's not relevant to this story. What's relevant is that the Cuban government hates Menendez and doesn't want him to get that power, right? So right before the election, they decide, oh, we got it. We'll go the oldest trick in the book. Now, many governments unfortunately use this. Let's smear him. And let's do a propaganda campaign against them. Just put some leaks out there. But what should we smear them with? Come on. Now, if you've been following not just this show, but what's been happening in this country and across the world for the last 10, 12 years, you know what's going to happen. Sex. Now, true or untrue, it's not important. All you got to do is do a sex scandal, right? And now, you got to make it extra bad. You say, oh, prostitutes. Now, Menendez isn't even married, right? So you got to say, oh, it was illegal. Oh, it's with a donor. It's in the Dominican Republic. Foreign prostitutes. But not quite bad enough, underage. Underage prostitutes. Okay. Now, it had one problem. It wasn't true at all. Now, the FBI has to do their job. They investigated it, of course, as they should, right? What if it was true? You got to do due diligence, right? So, Washington Post explains now in a story out today, the FBI investigated the prostitution claims but was unable to corroborate them. Last year, 3 Dominican women who had initially claimed to reporters that they had been paid to have sex with Menendez recanted their story. Now, how do we know this came from Cuba? Well, there was this tipster named Pete Williams. And they traced them back and they found out, doesn't look like there is any Pete Williams. And lo and behold, look at where those messages were sent from. So, quick summary of that also from the Post. According to former U.S. officials familiar with the intelligence, the information suggested that Cuban operatives worked through business allies and lawyers in the Dominican Republic to create the fictitious tipster. So the tipster tells us about the 2 underage prostitutes. You go to find out that no, none of their story matches at all. In fact, they then take this tipster and just don't give it to the government, give it to the media so that it leaks right before his re-election, and with not enough time to prove that it isn't true, right? It's kind of genius. So they go to a bunch of news outlets. They go to ABC News, for example, and here's what happens. ABC News said that it was introduced to the women and their story by Republican operatives at the same time, but decided against going with the story because the women appeared coached and were not able to provide identification cards. So now ABC News, actually, you might not know this, is a rare television news outlet that actually does pretty decent investigative journalism. And one of the reporters, Ross, breaks a lot of stories, which is very rare on television. So they go to ABC News, and so these guys are in the business of breaking stories. They look at it, my guess is that at first they're like, wow, what a story, right? Can't help but get a little excited to see how it's going to play out. And lo and behold, no, this story is complete and utter BS. Now, let's note here that Republican operatives tried to give this story to ABC News. I like the way the Republicans in this country are working with Fidel Castro and his brother. Strange bedfellows indeed. What happened? I thought you hated the communists. I thought you hated Castro and the Cuban government and goddamn commies. When it's convenient for you against the Democratic Center, oh, come on, let's shake on it. Let's do it. Let's go forward. Now, it's not absolutely clear that the Republican operatives knew that the fake tipster was initially planted by the Cuban government. You might have wanted to do due diligence on your own. Of course, not as the Republican Party. They're not going to do due diligence. But luckily, it didn't leak in the press, right? But wait, it did. So who leaked it into the press? Well, let's find out. The allegations first became public on November 1st, 2012, days before Menendez stood for re-election, with the Daily Caller reporting that 2 women said they had met Menendez around Easter that year at Casa de Campo Resort and that Menendez paid them for sex acts. Of course. If you're not familiar with the Daily Caller, you're not alone. It's a website that approximately 3.5 people go to. It's conservative. It's run by Tucker Carlson. That's why it has almost no readership at all. But what it does do is it introduces stories like this into the bloodstream of the media, and then the rest of the media go, well, the Daily Caller broke the story, so since the Daily Caller is reporting on it, we're now reporting on it. That's why after Daily Caller did it, everybody reported on the story. Now, did the Daily Caller bother to find out? No, it turns out it was Cuban operatives that fed you that story, that you were in fact working hand in hand with a guy you claim to have hated your whole life, Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and that whole family? No, it's against a Democratic senator. Print it. Let's go, Team Castro. What happened, conservatives at Daily Caller? These are not real media organizations. All of these conservative outlets, the blogs, the Fox News, the talk shows, they're just propaganda. They don't bother. Who cares? Is Castro giving me the news? Great. Mao, I'll take it. Who cares? Give it to me as long as it's against the Democrats. They're not real journalists. Stop treating them as such. Now, one little bit of irony here. It turns out that when they went to go investigate the sex parties at Menendez's donor's house in the Dominican Republic, they were like, hey, wait a minute. Now, why does he have this donor that's incredibly rich in the Dominican Republic? And then Menendez started writing letters on his behalf when that donor was being investigated by the federal government, the US government. Oops. Okay, so that's the real scandal. But that's not as sexy as a sex scandal. So that's why you don't go with like, oh, there he got money from donors and then did donors favors. Republicans don't want to go with that scandal because they live that scandal. They love that scandal. That's what their whole party's based on, right? Now, to me, that's the real scandal. You can't turn around and say, oh, he overcharged the US government by millions of dollars, but I'm going to go defend him and make sure he does. Why? Because I get to go throw great parties with him in the Dominican Republic, minus apparently the prostitutes, right? But unfortunately, the media is not excited by that, right? Oh, well, that seems to be like run-of-the-mill bribery when one of our politicians gets bought. There's no news there. Let's just move along. So, look, I feel bad for Menendez in some crazy way that his corruption, possible corruption, alleged, we'll see how the investigation of that goes, right, is unearthed because he was wrongfully smeared. But at the same time, look, if they got him and he's actually doing favors for these donors because he gets paid to, well, by all means, they should investigate that actual scandal.